Hello. Welcome everyone to our modularity for DePIN X space. We're getting everyone all joined and settled, so we'll start in just a few minutes.
Cool to see so many friends around.
Nothing better than talking modularity on a Friday. I know a lot of people are out in New York this week for SBC and the DePIN Summit, but we're going to have our own powwow here virtually. So excited to have everyone. Just a couple more minutes while we have the last speakers join, and we'll get started, everyone. All right. I think we got our awesome crew of speakers all on board. Let's get started, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our X Space today on DePIN modularity in action. The goal of today's space is just to bring together some of the best infrastructure builders across the Web3 sector that are working on different pieces of the modular infrastructure stack, not just for DePIN projects, but as DePIN reaches the masses and is commanding more and more traffic on blockchains, the demand for battle tested infrastructure, sound infrastructure, and just best in class infrastructure is growing. So we wanted to bring some of our friends and some of the top projects in the space in this category together just to talk about what the opportunities are, what they're working on, and what the current pulse of the modular infrastructure sector is. So without further ado, I wanted to start with some introduction. So today we have Giuseppe from IoTex, Stefan from Protocol Labs, and Akave, Mesh from Risk Zero, Jill from Espresso Systems, and Alton from Nuffle. So I'm going to have each of them just give a quick 1 to 2 minute intro about themselves and a little high level about their project, just to kick things off. So why don't we start with Jill from Espresso?
Hey, yeah, thanks so much. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Jill. I'm one of the co-founders of Espresso Systems. I am also the head of strategy there, meaning I oversee all things go to market. So great to be on here with a bunch of fellow infra players who we love and work with. So Espresso Systems, we are working on a sequencing layer. And what that means is that within rollups, within any blockchain, really, there's a specialized role of a transaction sequencer who, as the name suggests, orders transactions and puts them into the order in which they will be ratified and ultimately finalized on the chain. Um, we create software that enables rollups to coordinate that sequencing or that block building with each other such that they can achieve interoperability and synchronous composability with each other, effectively offering a user experience as if they're back on the L1. There's a bunch of other traits that come along with this that rollups can benefit from using us for, such as decentralization, optimizing their sequencer revenue that they're capturing, other things like this. But the name of the game is really rollup interoperability. So yeah, excited to dive into that topic alongside you all and explore the ways in which this is applicable to the DePIN ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. Let's have Stefan go next.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me, or good afternoon. I'm Stefan. I worked at Protocol Labs for a little bit over 3 years on building out the Filecoin network and helped grow one of the largest decentralized storage stacks with Filecoin. And obviously, I'm hoping that everyone knows who Filecoin is, but we've grown a ton. And so as part of the customer requirements, we have actually built an L2 to support customers with on-chain data lakes. This L2 really helps users with bringing their off-chain data sets onto a decentralized storage network. As we have seen is that a lot of customers, and we can talk about it today as well, even in the DePIN space, are still using Web2 infrastructure to host their data assets. And so to make that transition easy and being able to connect to their existing applications to a decentralized infrastructure, we have built Ikave as a way to provide a seamless user experience to easily connect to their Web2 applications to a Web3 backend. And today we are seeing a ton of use cases that are popping up that are not only taking advantage of decentralized storage to reduce cost, but also completely change the way they charge back their costs to the users, and essentially take advantage of the composability that can be unlocked with decentralized stacks to change business models that lead to better ways to monetize their data sets.
Awesome.
And that's it.
Thank you, Stefan. Let's have Mesh go next.
Hi, I'm Mashiat or Mosh. I work at Risk Zero. I am part of the partnerships and growth team. And yeah, so I can kind of go talk a little bit about what we're doing at Risk Zero. We are essentially building the universal ZK infrastructure for the future. And our bread and butter is really focusing on launching, we were one of the first teams to launch the world's first general purpose ZK VM that uses like a RISC-V architecture. Our goal was essentially to make deploying ZK applications super easy and helping developers get to market, in days rather than months or weeks. The way that we've kind of went about, designing our ZKVM is making sure that, developers only have to write guest programs, whether in Rust and Go or C++, rather than actually do cryptography or, build their own circuits. And our goal is really to use this innovation to help ZK technology go through rapid development and rapid advancement. So we've been, fine-tuning our ZK VM for the past 2 years. We've also been working with a lot of layer 2s and rollups, specifically Optimism, to build out ZEP, which is our first open source ZK Ethereum block prover. And quite recently, in June, we released our latest version, ZKVM 1.0. This is the first production-ready general-purpose ZKVM that, when it's paired with our universal verifier, it really enables dApp developers, chains, and infrastructure providers to leverage ZK universally. We're continuing to optimize our performance across our stack. Our goal is really, again, to help a lot of application developers deploy ZK or access ZK as easily and as seamlessly as possible. And yeah, we're really excited to explore. We've been obviously collaborating with IoTeX for a while, and I'm really excited to explore how our decentralized kind of vision fits in with DePIN and its journey.
Thank you so much, Mash. And let's go with Alton next.
I'm Alton. I'm one of the founders of Nuffle Labs. Nuffle Labs actually spun out of Near 2 months ago. So we are the team that built Near DA, which is the data availability layer solution that's built on Near. So it exposes Near's data availability for rollups. But Nuffle isn't just about DA. The next frontier for us is building a fast finality layer. That's an eigenlayer ABS that allows any network, any L2 pretty much, to access information from other networks in 3 to 4 second finality. So that allows you to build any multi-chain application or fast bridge or fast liquidity movements between different L2s. And so those are the 2 products that Nuffle Labs is known for.
Awesome. Thanks, Alton. And let's go with Giuseppe.
Sure. Well, first, I'm quite excited to be here with everybody. My name is Giuseppe. I'm part of the DevRel team at IoTeX. And IoTeX is the infrastructure that puts all the friends that are up here on stage with us today all together. Why? That's to basically streamline the process of building DePIN applications. And so we have various modules that we present to DePIN builders that go from all the way where the data is sort of like at inception level from the hardware. So from hardware abstraction layer all the way to the blockchain layer for token economy incentivization. And throughout all that, there are many different modules that run on decentralized networks, and some of which we do provide in-house, some of which we do leverage existing technologies and working with our friends up here on stage today to provide to DePIN builders. So I'm excited to go into the details of this and why this is important, and hear from all of you guys as well.
Awesome. Thanks to our speakers for these amazing introductions. I don't think I've introduced myself yet. My name is Larry, head of business development at IoTeX, and I'll be moderating our awesome X Space today. So for those of us just joining, the topic of today is modularity in action for the DePIN sector. For those that are kind of new to this modular concept, modularity is basically the use of individual and distinct functioning layers of technology that can be aggregated together and recombined together to achieve a larger purpose. Long story short, it's ways of putting best-in-class components together in order to achieve a larger goal. And this goal is to power DePIN, which we're going to focus on today. So a lot of different modules are needed to make DePIN work. As Giuseppe mentioned, IoTeX is doing a lot of things on the device side. Devices are kind of like the crux of the DePIN sector. So we have products like IOID and IOConnect that help give on-chain identities to devices. We have other partners that help to transmit this data and these services from their devices into different types of databases. And a lot of our partners today, once they have the DePIN data, act upon that data in different types of fashions, whether to store it in the case of Filecoin, whether to sequence it in the case of Espresso, whether to run zero-knowledge proofs on it, as is the case with RISC-0, and make it available in kind of the data availability layer, as is the case with Nuffle. So I want to start kind of one by one with each of the layers, kind of in that top-down flow that I just mentioned, and just give each of the projects a little bit more time to explain what is unique about their solutions in tackling the module that they focus on. Why don't we start actually first with the sequencer layer, going back to Jill. What makes Espresso different, and why is sequencing transactions as kind of a first step for handing it off to some of the other modules important for Web3 and for DePIN?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, it all really comes down to interoperability for us. If you think about the way that a blockchain works today, blockchains and rollups indeed end up being pretty much in silos in large part because they each have their own way of sequencing transaction. They all have their own, software that's doing that in some cases. As with many rollups today, they have their own centralized entities that are doing the transaction sequencing. In the case of Ethereum, of course, today you have this huge kind of supply chain now of proposers and block builders and then even solvers who are working together in tandem and have economic arrangements with each other to sequence transactions. Our aim is to create a layer that can sit across multiple chains and coordinate sequencing between them. And so, what you think about in the context of the DePIN space is, if you are running a DePIN network and you've earned some tokens by, running whether it's Wi-Fi software or collecting images for use in AI training or whatever it is from your device, whatever it is, the action that you've done that has allowed you to earn some tokens on that network. If you want to then go be able to get liquidity in those tokens from a DEX, say, that sits on a different chain, that sits in a different network, you're going to need to bridge to that DEX, or even more ideally, just be able to interact with that DEX on the other chain as if it was on the same chain as you. And that's what we're aiming for. That's really what we're about, is by coordinating sequencing across multiple chains, we can provide developers and users with something like that experience. There's a lot going on under the hood. We have a sequencing marketplace, which is somewhat akin to a block building auction, if you're familiar with how those work in Ethereum. We have a fast finality and data availability layer that are not really meant to be standalone products. Again, it's all in service of making the sequencing layer function in a way that's very fast, efficient, and again, gives users that L1-like experience without sacrificing the modularity of being able to build your own chain as a developer.
Awesome. So kind of really important in the DePIN sector to take this unstructured and raw data and sequence it in a way that makes it more compatible and interoperable. So now that we have the sequenced DePIN data, the next step is really to find a place to store it, whether it's for long-term storage or immediate use in the DA layer. So why don't we go to Alton and maybe share a little bit more about what Nuffle is doing on the DA side?
Yeah, sure. I'll start a little bit about our story. The way we kind of got into DA was I used to work at Near Foundation, and our team used to work at the labs team, which is Pagoda, and obviously the foundation. So when this started to take off and we started seeing a lot of L2s like Optimism, OP Stack launching, and Base being a very successful launch, we looked back at Near's tech stack and said, hey, like, what are the things that we can build here that is useful for rollups? And the basic thing that actually Near solved in 2020 by building a sharded blockchain was data availability. So the reason for that is if a shard goes down, for example, in Near, because Near is a sharded blockchain, the other shards should be able to come in and should be able to reconstruct that shard. And with that, there's a very robust data availability layer built in Near. And it for that reason, because Near is cheap and it basically has a bunch of users, almost like 2 million users a day, it was need to be built cheap and scalable. And why is that important for DePIN? A lot of DePIN applications actually need a lot of transactions. So they need to be storing tons of transactions somewhere. So for that reason, Nuffle, which is near DA, is a very compelling solution for a lot of folks. And the other thing is efficiency, right? So to be able to actually finalize the block finality is almost like 2 seconds on near, so you can actually finalize your sort of sequence pretty fast. So some of the things that we always talk about is, like for that reason, it's very, very useful sort of application for any DePIN rollups.
Amazing. So yeah, the DA layer is essential to make the data available and usable by different parties, right? I think there's a lot of different things that DePIN data can be used for, but finding a place to store this for the long term and running analytics on top of it is one important use case. Another is to generate proofs of real world work off of it. So that's really what Akave and Risk0 are working on. So maybe we can start with Akave. Tell us a little bit more about your former work doing things with Filecoin to store data in the long term, and some of the new things you're doing with Akave to run analytics and AI over that data. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously with Filecoin is the largest decentralized storage network today. And it is also the largest ZK Snark enabled network that's out there. So what that means is that we're using in Filecoin zero knowledge proofs to validate that your data's integrity is maintained over time, which is super important, because what is the problem when you're managing large data sets like video, audio, anything that starts to become too large to actually store on chain? You have to find a way to easily validate these off-chain data sets in an on-chain manner. And so Filecoin has successfully accomplished that and has been running for the last 4 years at really large scale. And the way Filecoin does it is by enabling these, first of all, the data gets converted into car files, and cryptographic hashes get stored on chain that represent the actual off-chain data set. And it's these cryptographic hashes that get validated on a regular basis, aka on a daily basis, to ensure that data integrity is maintained. And then that platform is today used for storing large media files, and also is a great repository, or is a great place to store backup or archives of chain states, transaction states, you name it. So if you're looking at long-term data availability, Filecoin is the right place to store it. Now, the way to store it into Filecoin is where Akave comes in, because what we have seen in the last 3 years is that users would come to us and say, hey, I would like to take advantage of Filecoin instead of Amazon. Can you please give me an S3 interface? So I would like to get all the benefits and the advantages of a decentralized network, which include obviously the verifiability, the lower cost, the scale, locality, etc. But I do still want a similar experience as Amazon for now, so that I can easily transition my off-chain data sets in a very transparent, like a very user-friendly way. And so this is where Kaveh came in. And so we started, by the way, Kaveh is a spin-off of Protocol Labs. I'm the CEO of that. And so we took a couple of engineers and we started building this, because what we're seeing is that you can have the best technology in the world. If users don't have an easy way to adopt it, right, it doesn't get adopted. And the easy way to adopt it today is by providing these interfaces. And that is what we're building with Kaveh. Now, the end goal, because in a lot of cases, it wasn't just to preserve data. It's like you said, it was to analyze, to run their ELT workloads against it, or because they wanted to share these data sets to their community in a verifiable way, so that they could track who is actually consuming it and then charge back to those consumers in a way that is, kind of creating new revenue streams. And so today, with this new AI wave that started last year, we're seeing a ton more demand for data sets that are either created from LLMs, like synthetic data sets, or generated AI data sets, basically, and also more curated data sets that are collected by DePIN devices that have a much higher value now than just data that originally was, available. And so to enable these users, these new workloads, we've created a Kave, which essentially gives you this ability to create an on-chain data lake where you can then easily ingest your data sets through your Web2 applications, because you can just point to an S3 endpoint or an S3 compatible endpoint. And at the same time, you can still take advantage of smart contracts and act on those data sets and build new business models, etc. So yeah, that's where we're coming from, and you can dive deeper into some of the use cases if you want to. But it's a lot of momentum now. I think I would say like last year we didn't have DePIN as a real class, a separate class. Now I'm really happy to see that this is like a new trend that is bringing a lot more ecosystems together, because that's what it takes to move some of these workloads from the cloud into a decentralized infrastructure.
Absolutely. We're all really excited to see DePIN kind of flourish, and having the ability to store and analyze DePIN data is a huge use case and going to bring a lot of opportunities. Another huge use case is taking this data that's sequenced and available and stored and generating proofs of real world work. And these days, zero knowledge proofs, everyone's kind of migrating over to this philosophy of using ZK to verify everything that's happening off chain. And for DePIN, of course, a lot of the real world activities are done off chain. So I want Mosh to share a little bit more about what RiskZero is doing on the ZK proving side, both for Web3 and also for DePIN.
Yeah, of course. I think first kind of maybe touch on how we're definitely partnering up, with IoTeX. I think IoTeX has been an amazing kind of ecosystem partner, friend of RiskZero, and taking us, and hand-holding us through the DePIN journey. We've been, collaborating more on IoTex's web stream layer 2. And this is really where we get to shine for bringing in, for helping IoTeX and DePIN builders on top of IoTeX generate ZK proofs for any of the raw data messages that are being supported on that layer, and then make them verifiable. The way that RiskZero's ZKVM works is that we're really focused on making ZK as accessible as possible and as performant as possible. And a big part of how we kind of do that is through two ways. First, of course, we use, as I mentioned, the RISC-V architecture, which really opens up the door for developers using Rust and folks from, a more mature developer ecosystem to come into ZK. And so now, developers, DePIN builders, who know Rust, don't need to learn Solidity. They can essentially write up their guest programs and run that through our ZKVM. For the way that we've been kind of doing it with WebStream, the way that I know that it works is that WebStream nodes essentially fetch the raw data messages from the supported infrastructures, and then they process them through our ZKVM to generate the ZK proofs. How we really make sure that these proofs are performant is through a very specific innovation that is done within the ZKVM known as continuations. So anytime that there is a guest program that is coming in, we essentially break that down into equal size segments and then independently prove them in a parallel fashion. And we've been really optimizing this performance a lot within our ZKVM 1.0, and are able to get down, our snarks, proving our snarks to around 15 seconds. And then, of course, with other general purpose ZKVMs, we are proving the RISC-V cycles around 2 times faster as well. In addition to ZKVM 1.0, a big piece of what also enables us to basically allow for highly performant proofs on top of IoTex's, layer 2 and other layer 2s is our universal ground 16 verifier. And IoTeX has deployed a version of this verifier on their layer 2, and this is really enabling folks to access cheap on-chain verification as well. we really want to, make these proofs useful. We want folks to be able to utilize these proofs and proofs of the derived data insights to build more scalable applications. And we want them to have very seamless integration into our ZKVM and our universal ZK stack as well. And that's really why we're, really building out all of these core components of not just our ZKVM, but other pieces such as the verifier, libraries, support for multiple languages. All of these things are super important for us so that we can get more DePIN builders to build on top of IoTeX and other DePIN layers and kind of scale their applications as fast as possible. I will say, like, a really unique feature that we do have is our Steel library. This is a new feature that we added in with our ZKVM 1.0, and it's available to all DePIN builders that are accessing proofs on top of WebStream. This enables our ZKVM to actually act as a ZK coprocessor, because you can essentially access a lot of historical on-chain data, and you can then offload a lot of complex calculations within our ZKVM. You can use different functions within that library to add, subtract, multiply. You can generate multiple proofs of multiple historical on-chain data points, compose them together, aggregate them into one single proof, and then post that single proof on-chain. And that really enables you to also access a lot more scalable benefits and really help not only L2 scale infinitely, but to also help a lot of dApps and DePIN dApps that are building on top of IoTeX to scale infinitely.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing a little bit about what's going on in the ZK space and how it applies to DePIN. So, we covered a lot of the independent modules, from DA to long-term storage to analytics to sequencing and now to ZK. But I want to invite Giuseppe to kind of wrap it all together, right? How does IoTeX put together all these modules and make them applicable for DePINs to build on?
Yeah, Larry, that's a great point. And if you've been following so far, each of the other speakers highlighted basically what they bring to the table. And if you think about it, I mean, each component is a project on its own. So building, as a DePIN builder, a decentralized application that leverages all of these components and more, obviously, because we're not covering like the entire data pipeline, it becomes an enormous undertaking that requires many different skills. So it requires like somewhat of a large dev team. And on top of that, it has a pretty high learning curve and a pretty long go-to-market. So the whole point of putting all this together as IoTeX, and the whole point of this like modular infrastructure, was to make the go-to-market much faster, allow all these components to sort of like talk to each other on top of the ones that IoTeX provides, which I'll talk about in just a second, and make it much faster, much easier, and much more streamlined for then DePIN projects to exist. And again, why? The reason is because when you look at the industry right now, basically, I think almost all, if not all, DePIN projects at the moment are sort of like, let's say they have three main components, right? So they have the decentralized network of physical devices. That's one component. And there is the whole on-chain aspect of the project, where usually the token lives, and maybe there is some sort of like token economy or business logic attached to it. And then there is this third huge component, which is basically normally a centralized infrastructure. So we want to move away from that for obvious reasons, and they're the same reasons that why we want to why the whole Web3 exists, right? We want to eliminate a single point of failure. We want to have more transparency. We want to have more composability, so nobody has to like build or reinvent the wheel every time they want to basically create a new application. And there is more interoperability, which then opens up a whole set of new use cases for people to just build on top of this data coming from all these various DePIN networks. And so on top of the modules that each speaker was highlighting, I think something that besides the layer one blockchain, which is basically the module or the component that IoTex started with back in 2019, I think two components that are majorly important are the identity layer and the hardware abstraction layer. And while the hardware abstraction layer is sort of like the first entry point for data in a way coming from these devices, so more of like horizontal. The identity layer is more vertical. What I mean is it's a component that basically it sort of like touches all of these other modules together, because it's essentially a decentralized protocol to manage the identity of devices, the identities of a certain project, of a DePIN project within all these infrastructures, and manage the identity of the owners of these devices that get basically, rewarded based on the, let's say, of what the device is doing, right? The changes in the physical state, be it maybe a sensor network or any sort of like DePIN network. And it's quite complex because basically it's a decentralized protocol, so it allows for like peer-to-peer communication between all of these players without a centralized entity sort of like to orchestrate all of this. And on the hardware side, our hardware SDK, it's actually the first of its kind that is abstracted enough in a way that can work with various other types of platforms. And that is because it has sort of like two layers. One layer is a little bit more of a general layer. And that sort of like has general aspects that are valid for like any platform that's like a Raspberry Pi, being an Arduino or being ARM, etc. And then some like specific layers. That's called this layer is called PAL, and it's a specific layer based on whatever devices you have in your network. So without getting too much into the weeds, basically the whole point, just like the identity layer, or just like maybe the off-chain computing layer, is to create something, an infrastructure that is specific but yet abstracted enough so that anybody can basically participate into this infrastructure, like the various Filecoin, Espresso, RiskZero, Nuffle, etc., and make it easy to like orchestrate all of this in a decentralized way. And I think one of the coolest aspects of how this is done, it's not done with just magic. It's done through this MSP that we launched when we launched the IoTex 2.0 a few weeks ago. And this MSP is basically this modular security pool. And how does it work? It's basically a pool of assets. It's a way of basically having these, we call them DIMs. It's like DePIN infrastructure modules. It's basically it could be like a web stream, it could be like a sequencer network, it could be like a DA layer, etc. These networks, because each of them is basically a network that runs on its own consensus in a way, they can inherit the security of like IoTex and maybe other major layer ones through restaking. So, we're all pretty accustomed to restaking and how it works. But the point is that it becomes a win-win situation for validators, for infrastructure providers, and for DePIN projects on the other side of the equation, because all of a sudden validators can be rewarded by infrastructure providers. Infrastructure providers have these secured decentralized networks that they can run infrastructure on, and then at the end of the day, the DePIN projects and these infrastructure providers have these sets of quote unquote clients, which are the DePIN projects, and the DePIN projects finally have somebody that can run whatever service they need in a decentralized way. And I will stop here because I think I covered a lot of stuff, but the whole point of this is then to open up. I think Larry, you mention it often. It's all of this is not really the goal. It's like a means to an end. And the next step, I think, is like interoperability. And then the next step after that is when all of a sudden anybody can build on top of these DePIN networks, on top of the data from all these DePIN networks. And all of a sudden we start seeing, applications that aggregate all this data, and it can only be done in a DePIN sense, where you can get a lot more granular, you can get a lot more specific, and anybody that participates in these networks then gets rewarded. And I see that's a huge benefit of DePIN, and that's sort of like where I see it going and how I see it becoming like larger and larger.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree, Giuseppe, that, a modular system of decentralized components is kind of like a system design. Verification across all layers of the DePIN devices and the DePIN data is the goal or the output of that modular system design. And the opportunities that stem from a verified set of data and verified set of devices is truly endless. We're talking about, running analytics on top of the data, interoperating the devices, aggregating resources across different DePINs together. It really requires us to follow this decentralized and verifiable approach. And I heard a lot of people mention decentralization and verification. So I want to double click into that and hear from each of the speakers about what is the real need for decentralization and verification within your own niche, and how do you think that applies to DePIN in the future? Maybe we'll go in the same order as last time, starting with Jill.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the need for decentralization, it always comes down to two things. One is censorship resistance. I mean, to some degree, that is what this whole industry is founded upon, right? If you can trust a centralized intermediary, then you're probably going to be better off from a performance perspective, at least to do so. Um, and then, kind of the corollary to censorship resistance or credible neutrality, I would say, is just how open your system is for others to work with. There's this idea of walled gardens that exists in Web 2. You can think about the Apple App Store as a great example of a walled garden, not very interoperable with other systems. There's, again, kind of a centralized intermediary. Okay, maybe not censoring what's going on in the App Store, but at a minimum, with that kind of centralized control curating it. And that makes the App Store, again, not very interoperable, really not playing nice with a lot of other systems. A lot of crypto apps have experienced this as they've tried to get listed on the App Store. It can be a huge struggle. And so that really, to me, is what the value prop of decentralization comes down to, whether we're talking about it in the context of a DePIN system, whether we're talking about it in the context specifically of the sequencing component of DePIN chains and rollups in general, is really just that, again, credible neutrality or censorship resistance, and then the openness of the system. That really is our goal at Espresso Systems, is to create more open systems through a credibly neutral layer. That's why it's important to us to have our system be decentralized. And that's why it's important to us to bring decentralization of the sequencing layer to rollups and chains in Ethereum and beyond.
Incredibly well said. Thank you for that. Alton, what do you think from the DA side about decentralization and verification? How do you guys approach that, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, as you all know, you can actually store your sequence in a very centralized manner. You can store your roll-up sequence in an AWS node. But the downside of that is when you ask that AWS node, it might not just serve the data to you, right? That's the most important thing about data availability. Being decentralized is that when you ask the nodes, in our case, it's near nodes, to provide that data, we get something back. And for that reason, the reason why we use Near for this as well is Near has been a network that's been running for more than 4 years. It has a strong sort of quote unquote cryptoeconomic security, meaning there's a lot of stakers that commit to run validators, and we literally tap into Near's validators to do so. So that's what we care about mainly in terms of decentralization, and we believe that DA as its own could be further decentralized, even not only with near DA, but also other DA providers as well, as we know. So not only relying on one service, but eventually one rollup relying on a bunch of different DAs at the same time, just to make sure that you max out your decentralization.
Absolutely. The permissionless access to the data is definitely a prerequisite for the data being available at all times. So it makes total sense. Stefan, from Akave's perspective, what do you think what do you think are the main drivers of your designs around decentralization and verification for data storage and for data analytics?
Yeah, in general, like what is really important is outside of the other topics that were mentioned already is the ability to control your data. And so I think for us, we're very much centered around data integrity. Falcon has, obviously all the primitives built in to ensure that, and data integrity, and make sure that data integrity is maintained over time, but also the ability to control from a user's perspective who has access to that data. So it's not just like guaranteeing and that the data was stored in the same format as it was intended to, but also like you can control who has access to it and how you share that in general. So it's this notion of like control, and then there's this notion of transparency. I kind of was mentioned earlier, but for data in particular, the goal is to have end-to-end transparency. So as data gets moved across multiple providers in a decentralized network, you not only as a user have control where that data is landed, how it's being managed, how it's protected, but also you have full on-chain proof and guarantees that it's stored in an immutable and consistent way. And so the fact that you have control across the stacks, meaning across the different providers in the network, and you're not stuck with one single vendor, which is typically what we're seeing when users come to us, is their pain points with Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or any of the cloud providers that are more centralized, is that they're stuck with high egress costs when they want to use the data or they want to pull it back, or they are stuck into the offerings that have been provided by those providers for all their data sets. Well, in fact, no single data set is the same and no single value is the same, meaning as data is like the core IP in the end of an organization, or that's where we're seeing the bucket going. It's like, hey, data is a much more valuable asset than we used to think. And also now we can actually monetize it. Decentralization comes in handy where we can demonstrate integrity and can give back user control. And so that seems to be one of the biggest asks when users come to us, specifically when they're looking at building new workloads, new proof of concepts that are supporting these new LLMs that are being deployed to really find insights on their new data sets. And then they're starting to realize, the customers, that hosting those data sets with central entities is not a safe bet. It is a bet, but in the long run, there's better ways now to protect and monetize it. And we're seeing now, like, actually users coming to that insight, even in the enterprise space, more like the emerging verticals. But in general, it's a big change from where we were last year, where that was still a question. Now it's actually more urgent, because if you don't do it as a business, if you're not trying to monetize your data sets, your competitors will. So it's really just a race. But yeah, so this is where we see the need for decentralization to ensure that data integrity and control are sort of maintained across these new workloads.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the mantra of you can't control what you don't own, right? So another benefit of decentralization, as Stefan has put it, control over your assets in the form of data. Let's go to Mosh to talk a little bit about what Risk Zero prioritizes as far as decentralization and verification. I know verification is baked into the the ethos of kind of ZK, but why is decentralization important for Risk Zero?
Yeah, absolutely. Decentralization has been kind of our guiding pillar for this year. I would even say, while in the beginning, I think a lot of the sentiment was like, yeah, it's a nice to have. We first need to get these proofs working and these proofs accessible. Now it's really become a must to have. And it's particularly important because we ourselves, when we started out as Risk Zero, our first kind of production ready version of the ZKVM was centralized. And, right now we still have this offering up, which is known as Bonsai. It's our kind of centralized proving as a service. It's available to a lot of folks on the commercial side that really want kind of a trusted entity generating the proofs that they need. And it really is helpful in many ways because, you are able to request production ready, highly performant proofs without running any of the software on your machine. And, you can essentially just give that to us. But what we've really seen in the ZK space is that in addition to the need for generating and verifying ZK proofs to be trustless and, censorship resistant, I think there's also a big importance on liveness as well. And, as we speak to a lot of folks and a lot of our partners, making sure that our proving service has very strong liveness guarantees, and that the network is really going to stay operational and reliable regardless of whoever is requesting proofs is super important to them. I'd also like to echo as Stefan said, having ownership of your own data is super, super important. And I think that's a big pillar of ZK as well. It's really a pathway to having more self-sovereign data. And that's also the reason why I really got into this space. As we're speaking to a lot of partners as well, it's becoming abundantly clear that enabling client-side proving is going to be absolutely key. We are working very hard to make that happen at around Q4 and Q1 of next year. And we're working with a lot of partners who themselves are pushing the agenda forward in, allowing folks to be able to generate proofs on their phones, on their machines, just so that we are able to kind of uphold that pillar of folks being able to own their own data and reduce any kind of other forms of centralization risk. A big piece of ZK is that this year we've really seen an inflection point with general purpose ZK VMs. I think as we've seen the rise of new ZK VMs coming into the market and new ZK VMs that are using the RISC-V architecture, our hypothesis and why we bet on developing a RISC-V general purpose ZK VM has been supremely validated. But I still think there is a huge hurdle when it comes to implementation. We're really doing our best to make access to ZK very feasible and seamless for developers. But there's still a lot of barriers. I think a lot of developers have to rewrite a lot of their programs into Rust to be able to access the benefits of our ZK VM. There's of course latency improvements that we are continuing to get better at. We want to keep the cost as low as possible, both the cost of generating proofs, but the cost of verifying proofs as well. And we really want to be kind of the purveyors and the pioneers of opening up, what the proving marketplace should look like, and keeping that modular and not keeping that bound to any specific chain or any specific roll-up. And so this is a pretty exciting kind of announcement, but we're actually looking into building out a decentralized prover network. And essentially the way that we're thinking about doing it is that it's going to be a very modular design, a set of smart contracts that could be deployed to any rollup or any chain. And we really want to democratize access to proof generation, make sure that, we can essentially be a place for other provers to come in, where they can have access to novel bidding strategies, and also generate and meet the demand for highly performant proofs whilst there's heavy workloads. And I think all of that combined is really why going down the decentralized route and making sure that, this next iteration of Risk Zero is going to be decentralized from the get-go is super, super important. So yeah, I hope that kind of explains, how we're kind of going down the the decentralization route. And of course, all of the benefits of our prover network will, a ripple effect to a lot of our partners, such as IoTex and other partners in the DePIN space.
Awesome. Thanks for giving a peek into the world of ZK and how it's kind of decentralizing over time. I want to go to Giuseppe. We talked a lot about how the different decentralized layers are creating technologies that accomplish specific goals, but all of these things contribute to the larger goal of powering DePIN. From your perspective, how do you think DePIN is going to decentralize and become more verifiable over time, starting now?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you guys all talked about, on the infrastructure level, and I agree with all these points. But yeah, if we can, switching it to DePIN, right? I believe, first of all, DePIN is DePIN applications are a special type. There is a financial incentive that is tied to whatever physical action, physical change of state it is that you're trying to prove. So in a way, that has to be verifiable to a degree that then you can then orchestrate rewards accordingly. Now, from the end perspective, from the end user perspective, I think if we don't get to a point where there is a trustless system to orchestrate this, and there is a trustless way of proving business logic that goes behind the rewards, in a DePIN network, then we haven't gone anywhere in the industry as a whole. I want transparency when DePIN application X is deciding what the reward should be for my contribution to the network. Otherwise, it's the same as a Web 2 scenario. And in the same way, I don't want the centralized orchestrator to then, like Jill was saying, earlier, to sequence the data or, package the data in a way that can maybe favor one person or one player over another. And so, yeah, I don't see decentralization as a nice to have in the DePIN industry as a whole anymore. It was kind of quote unquote okay for the first wave, but right now I think it's totally a must have, and there's going to be more and more pressure from the industry and from communities for applications to start decentralizing. And the largest benefit, I think, in DePIN is that once you sort of open up, decentralization, that brings DePIN interoperability, Larry, we said earlier. And why is that important? That is important for a number of reasons. One, like I was hinting at earlier, I don't have to build sort of in silos. And that is really important, both for builders and for the space as a whole. Number two, all the use cases that open up thanks to decentralization, then all of a sudden are possible. And number three, which is very, very specific to DePIN, and I find it more to be less on the technical side, more on the social, economic aspect, is that we are seeing, for example, that DePIN are sort of thriving where general centralized infrastructure is starting to fail their quote unquote clients or customers. So what does that mean? It means that maybe we have some projects in the IoTex ecosystem that are maybe that are based in Africa, in areas that are generally less served in terms of infrastructure, where maybe services are expensive because maybe they're fossil fuel based, and there is not really incentive for any centralized company to just go somewhere there and all of a sudden run a cellular network. DePIN, on the other hand, can, because first of all, it then boosts the local economy. Second of all, local people still earn where there is a central, maybe a central infrastructure provider that doesn't see any value in going in a less served area, then there is a ton of value for the local people. And the same thing we're seeing with a ton of our projects that are based in Latin America, Southeast of Asia, etc. So yeah, I try to cover, a little bit of tech, a little bit of like social, economical, and a little bit of like, the ethos of like DePIN as a whole. But I think those for me are the main reasons.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Giuseppe. I really agree that, the decentralization and the verification for DePIN is what's going to bring it to the next level. DePIN has the word decentralization in it, but I think we're just on step one towards it, and all the amazing speakers that were part of our space today are definitely helping to advance DePIN to become more decentralized, more verifiable, and therefore attract more utility to these networks. So I know we're just a little bit over time, but I just want to give all of our speakers one chance to share a little bit about any announcements, what's coming up, and maybe something that they're excited for the DePIN space for the rest of the year. So I think that Jill from Espresso had to drop. If you're listening and you want to jump back on stage, shoot me a request here. But let's start with Alton. What's going on with Nuffle for the rest of the year, and what are you excited about in DePIN?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm excited about, maybe I'll give you the example of witness chain and verifiable compute. Like, I think the next things that we'll see is, we've built a lot of blockchains, but I believe in a world that's, restaking can do a lot of the cool things that DePIN can do. So I believe in that world, and we've already started building in that sort of another primitive that is essentially aggregating all restaking. So you can think about a way of like, there's EigenLayer, obviously, there's now Babylon, there's a bunch of stuff launching on Sol. So we're thinking about internally a pretty much a thin layer on top of restaking platforms across different blockchains. So that's kind of where we see sort of Nuffle going, and you actually DePIN applications can use that to verify anything pretty much using restaked assets.
Very cool. Yeah, more security at lower levels of the stack, definitely going to propel the industry forward. Stefan, you want to go next? What's going on with the Kave, and what are you excited about for DePIN for the rest of the year?
Yeah, well, we're looking to release our testnet later this year, so excited for that, as we have a ton of decentralized compute partnerships. So what we're seeing is definitely an adoption of decentralized compute, which is driving the need for data verifiability. And so we're very excited to like enable these new workloads, because last year we saw some early interest in decentralized compute. This year it's basically massive amounts of stacks or networks that are popping up, and we're seeing definitely a transition from just AI. If you look at the AI workloads, we're seeing a transition from just doing inferencing to now fine tuning, and next will be training LLMs in a decentralized way. And we're definitely seeing already some solutions popping up, and all of them are very focused on verifiability. So I'm excited to see some of these coming to life. And obviously with Akave being the data layer for that, and Falcon the final repository for this. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of great movement there in the decentralized AI, it's called, ecosystem in that space, because I think that is driving all of our DePIN architectures together, definitely now. So excited to see that come to fruition. And then we'll be at DEF CON in Thailand, so I'm excited for that personally, to see a lot of partners again.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, decentralized compute definitely taking over, and excited to see what Akave is going to put out for the rest of the year. Mosh, do you want to share a little bit about, you shared a lot about the product suite of RISC-0, but share a little bit more about what can we look forward to this coming year, and what you're excited about in DePIN.
Yeah, don't want to give away too much, otherwise my marketing manager will like kill me. But what I can say is that we are going full steam in the decentralized route, and we're definitely building out the initial designs of our prover network. We will be doing a permission DevNet just with a few handful of partners. But at the same time, we're still supporting a lot of partners with integrations with our ZKVM 1.0. And some of the things that I'm so super excited about is, having folks that are building more DApp applications, like in DeFi, in gaming, in the identity space, that want to access or leverage more interoperable benefits of ZK. I highly recommend, please DM me, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. We really want to, build out an ecosystem of dApps that are leveraging our ZK coprocessor, our Steel library, and our universal verifier as well, so that they can deploy their application to any chain, and they can also reap the benefits of cross-chain compatibility. And I really want to see that ecosystem, that part of the ecosystem thrive. So if you're building in that arena, please reach out to me. If you are interested in learning more about our prover network, about our permission DevNet, how we're kind of thinking about it, please reach out to me. My DMs are usually always open, and if they're not, I will open them. But yeah, I think that's kind of what's our goal for the next few quarters, is really doing different iterations of our prover network, seeing what the market thinks, seeing how we can really improve our developer experience. Seamless integration and ease of deployment is top of mind. And then taking that feedback in so that we can build out, our testnet and eventually like our mainnet kind of structures. We are also planning on hosting a few local meetups in New York and SF. So please keep a lookout for that. I'd love to see everyone here in person and meet you in person. And we will also be, I believe there's a big part of the team going to Token 2049, and then I'll also be there in DEF CON. So we will be keeping the community here posted on our new developments and our new optimizations as well, so that we can make ZK proving accessible, cheap, affordable, and fast.
Awesome. Thank you, Mosh. And finally, Giuseppe, close us out today with some thoughts about what IoTeX is going to be up to for the rest of the year, and what you're most excited for in DePIN.
Sure. Let's see. So I think what I'm most excited about, first of all, is to have been working and continue to work with all of you guys and make this infrastructure, reach so many more, exciting DePIN projects. I'm excited for the projects that are building in our ecosystem, but at the same time, I'm also excited for the DePIN convergence, which I want to see more ecosystem coming together, and I wanted to see so that it's regardless of the fact that maybe you're on Solana, maybe you're on Ethereum, maybe you're on IoTeX. I just want to see applications starting to work multi-chain, and I want to see more and more DePIN action. I think maybe, Larry, I counter question to you, and I think you would be, as our head of BD, the best person to say, what are you excited about now?
Thanks for that opportunity, Giuseppe. Yeah, I think DePIN is at a really interesting crossroads right now, where we're evolving out of the baby steps of just standing up the supply side of a network, and we're seeing several DePINs showing how the right way to build sustainable demand is going to look. I think the things that are going to unlock the next levels of demand are really around verifiability of what's going on in these DePINs, right? I think, unlike other industries within crypto, such as DeFi, where everything happens on chain and is therefore pretty much verifiable if the L1 that they launch on is trustworthy, so much stuff in the DePIN sector happens off chain and therefore needs to be verified before large enterprise customers or consumers pay for the services, the data, the resources from these DePIN networks. Unfortunately, we've also had a couple of hiccups along the way where unverified DePINs were putting out very large numbers and damaged the brand around the demand for these DePINs a bit. But IoTex's big goal for the next year is to really lean in and work on influential use cases around the verification of DePINs, not only issuing verifiable on-chain device identities to devices, but verifying the data coming from these devices, verifying the proofs that stem from that data, and ultimately providing a trusted form of utility that I think will propel DePINs to the next level. So this is not just for DePINs that are launching on IoTeX. We really want to be a service provider to DePINs across all blockchains, L1s and L2s, to verify DePIN and help bring the industry to the next level. So you're going to hear a lot more from the IoTeX team around our new initiatives and new partners around verifiability, which includes, of course, our amazing speakers today. But for those that want to get in touch more with the topic of today, which was modularity of the DePIN sector, really encourage everyone to check out our IoTeX 2.0 white paper and some of our other research papers where we define what each of these layers are meant to do in relation to DePIN and how these different layers and modules are going to evolve over time. So with that, hopefully that was enough of a teaser for what's going on at the end of the year. Really want to thank all of our speakers for joining incredible space. And we really look forward to building the future of DePIN with you guys. So hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll be back next week with more spaces. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.